My name is Greg, and this is my story. I was 32 when I got deployed to England. It was 1952, and the world felt quieter back then. My wife Mary and our 8-year-old daughter Kayla came with me. We wanted a fresh start, a place away from the noise and chaos. I wanted my little girl to grow up in peace, somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. I thought I found that place. We settled on a house just outside the countryside, spacious, charming, not too far from the town, but tucked away enough to feel like our own little world. It was the kind of house you'd expect to find in an old storybook. Tall windows, ivy creeping up the brick walls, and an eerie stillness about it. It had been empty for a long time, or so the widow told me. I bought it from an old woman, Mrs. Whitaker. She must have been in her late 60s, frail but sharp. There was something about her, the way she looked at the house when she handed me the keys. She didn't live there anymore, hadn't for nearly 2 decades. Said she couldn't bear to stay after her husband passed. He died suddenly, buried in the cemetery, and that was all she offered. I didn't press for details. Some things are better left alone, or so I thought at the time. The first thing that struck me was how much of her life was still inside those walls. Her husband's violin sat untouched in the corner, its strings rusted and warped with age. An old rotary phone, stacks of books with pages crumbling at the edges. It was like she had left in a hurry and never looked back. We spent the first week cleaning, tossing everything out. We wanted a fresh start. Mary was happy, Kayla was excited, and for a while, so was I. The first 3 months were peaceful. It was everything we'd hoped for. Quiet mornings, cozy nights by the fireplace, the kind of life you dream of after years of moving from one place to another. Kayla would play in the yard. Mary would hum old songs while cooking, and I'd sit on the porch with a cigarette, watching the wind roll through the fields. For the first time in a long time, I felt settled. But then, she disappeared. Mrs. Whitaker, I mean. I hadn't seen her since the day I got the keys. I figured she'd moved on, started a new life somewhere else. Didn't think much of it. I had my own life to worry about. I never imagined it was the house I should have been worried about. It started with Kayla's dreams. Little things at first. She'd wake up in the morning and tell us about the children she played with. She said they were funny, that they played hide and seek with her in the basement. We laughed it off. Kids have imaginations, right? Maybe she missed her friends back home. Mary and I didn't think much of it. Then the dreams became frequent. Every night she'd tell us about them, how they would call her outside, ask her to play in the rain, said they were always waiting for her. It unnerved me, but I told myself it was just a phase. Kids make up things all the time. At least that's what I told myself, until the morning everything changed. I was leaving for camp early that day. Mary was still asleep, and I wanted to kiss Kayla goodbye before heading out. I stepped into her room, but something wasn't right. I remember standing there staring at her. Her clothes were filthy, covered in mud, her feet caked in dirt, like she'd been running outside barefoot all night. But that wasn't possible. She went to bed after the movie last night. She never left the house. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at her, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced with explanations, but none of them made sense. I called Mary, and the moment she saw Kayla, her face drained of color. We woke her up gently, and I asked her, "Kayla, why are your clothes dirty?" She rubbed her eyes, smiled, and said, "I was playing with them again." I asked her who they were. She looked at me confused, like I should already know. "The children, Daddy, the ones from the basement." I don't know what scared me more, the fact that she believed it so fully, or the fact that I was starting to believe it too. I left for camp that morning, but my mind was back in that house. Mary said she'd watch her closely, keep her home from school, just for a day. But it didn't matter. That night, it happened again. I came home to find them both asleep in our bed. Mary thought it was the safest way to keep Kayla close, but when I looked at her, I saw the same thing. Mud on her hands, grass in her hair, clothes damp and dirty. I could feel something tightening around my chest, something I couldn't explain. I called off camp the next week. Something was wrong. I knew it, but I had no idea how deep it went. Sometimes, I think back to that day I met Mrs. Whitaker, the way she handed me the keys, the look in her eyes, like she knew, like she wanted to tell me something, but didn't. Maybe she thought I wouldn't believe her. Maybe I wouldn't have. But now, I know the truth, and I'd give anything to go back and never set foot in that house. I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong with my daughter. Something was wrong with my house. But I was a rational man, a military man. I tried to find logical answers. Sleepwalking, maybe. Stress. Kids dream. Kids wander. But deep down, I knew. I knew it was something else. Mary was worried more than I'd ever seen her before. She didn't say much, but I could see it in the way she watched Kayla. The way she clung to her during the day, afraid to let her out of sight. And Kayla, she was changing. Little by little. She started talking about them, these children in her dreams. Only they weren't dreams anymore. She knew their names. Tom, Alice, Henry. She'd sit in the living room staring at the window, whispering their names like they were standing right outside, waiting for her. And the way she looked at us, it was like we weren't enough anymore. Like she belonged somewhere else. I thought maybe it was just a phase. Maybe she was just lonely. But then I found something. I was clearing out the basement one afternoon, looking for something, anything to explain what was happening. And that's when I found it. Tucked away in the farthest corner, under an old moth-eaten rug, there was a door. A small wooden door I hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath years of dust and forgotten things. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. But it didn't stop the feeling in my gut, the one that told me something was waiting behind it. Something I didn't want to see. I didn't tell Mary about it. Not yet. I didn't want to scare her. But that night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Kayla breathe beside us. I could hear it. Faint, almost too quiet to notice. A soft tapping, coming from the floor beneath our bed. Like something was waiting or knocking. The next morning I needed to get out of that house, clear my head. I told Mary I was going into town for some supplies, but the truth was, I went to the coffee shop. I just needed to sit somewhere normal, be around normal people. But I guess the house wasn't done with me yet. I sat at the counter, staring into my cup, trying to convince myself that this was all in my head. And that's when he sat down next to me. An old man, weathered, quiet. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You bought the Whitaker house, didn't you?" I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. And then he told me things I didn't want to hear. He said the house had history, that back in the 1930s, before Mrs. Whitaker, it belonged to a family with children. Children who went missing. People talked. Rumors spread. The father, he was accused of things, but nothing was ever proven. And then one day, the whole family vanished. I felt sick. The way the old man looked at me, it was like he knew something I didn't, like he was waiting for me to figure it out on my own. I went home that night with my hands shaking. Mary could tell something was off, but I didn't have the heart to tell her what I'd heard. Instead, I went straight to the basement, straight to that door. I pried it open, and what I found, I'll never forget. There were toys, old, broken toys, tiny shoes, a rag doll with its face torn off, and the smell, damp earth and something else, something worse. But the worst part was the small handprints, faint, smeared into the walls. I couldn't breathe. I slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. But Kayla, she was already standing at the top of the stairs watching me, smiling. And in that moment, I swear to God, I didn't recognize my own daughter. I wanted to run, pack up and leave that night. But it was too late. That night, she vanished. We woke up and Kayla was gone. No footprints, no open doors, just gone. We searched the entire house, every room, every inch of the property. And then we found her. She was sitting in the basement in the dark, staring at the wall, whispering to them. To the ones I couldn't see, I called her name. but she didn't turn around. I stepped closer, and when I touched her shoulder, she turned to me. And God, her eyes weren't hers anymore. She just smiled and said, "I'm staying with them now, Daddy." I don't remember much after that, just the feeling of the house closing in on me. I don't remember how we got out. I don't even remember leaving, but I remember Kayla's voice echoing down the hall as we ran, saying goodbye. We never found her. The police searched, people talked, but no one could explain it. And I had to live with it, with the truth. I see her sometimes, in my dreams, standing in the basement, smiling, waiting, and I know the house still has her, and it always will. Some say houses can't hold memories, that they're just wood and stone, but I know better now. Some places don't forget, some places don't forgive, and some never let go. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? A sound in the night? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? Maybe you've lived in a house with a past of its own. I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Terrifying Creepy Stories. There's always another tale waiting in the dark, and I'll be here to tell it.